All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for UCS's annual Kansas Public Policy Forum. I would like to take a moment and thank our state, county, city, and school board elected officials who are joining us today. Thank you all for your tireless service during what has been a very challenging year. Your leadership is more important than ever, and we know that we are all here to work together and support our community's recovery. Welcome and appreciation to our agency partners, our city and county staff, advocates, funders, UCS board, council advisor members who are all joining us today. A special thank you to our legislative members who are part of today's program. We are thrilled to end this year with a conversation on civility and a look ahead to the 2021 state legislative session. One housekeeping announcement: we encourage folks to use the chat feature this morning for questions and comments. For best viewing experience, we ask that audio and camera functions remain off. Please check the chat feature throughout, as we will be putting in links to information and responding to questions throughout this morning's forum. The short PowerPoint presentation that is a part of the beginning of today's event will be available on the UCS website subsequent to today's event. You know, I was sharing with our UCS staff team yesterday, as this year winds down, I think we need to take a breath. Look at this like a marathon. We are not quite to the finish line, and we still have miles to go as we move into next year, but we are all in this together. And I hope today's event will provide everyone with some important information, connections, and tools for the next big push across the finish line and into recovery. As we begin today's program, we wanted to take a moment and share some of UCS's public policy priorities. Hopefully everyone received a copy of our public policy platform that was sent out yesterday via email. United Community Services of Johnson County believes in the importance of supporting policies, programs, and services that invest in the health and well-being of our community and provides people with the opportunity to achieve their individual potential. For those of you who have joined us for the forum over the last few years, I know you know that we have had a focus on framing our work through the health equity lens, which is the ability to make healthy choices through ensuring everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. We know that 50% of what creates our health outcomes can be attributed to social and economic factors and our surrounding environment. These are called the social determinants of health. To have a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible requires removing obstacles to health, such as poverty, discrimination, and their consequences, such as lack of access to good jobs with fair pay, quality education, housing, safe environments, and healthcare. So, how has the pandemic impacted health equity? Let's take a look at a few key areas. First, unemployment. We know that a good job is the access point to securing housing, healthcare, and meeting essential needs. As the data shows, our initial unemployment claims have grown exponentially since the start of the pandemic, with the county seeing more than 100,000 initial claim filings. Understanding that there is some noise in this data due to fraudulent claims, we are also looking at where our numbers are regarding claims that have been approved for payment. And although they are down from initial highs this spring, we see these figures rising again. The unemployment rate in Johnson County as of the end of October was 4.4%. Pre-pandemic, we were considered fully employed with an unemployment rate at the same time last year of 2.5%. Job loss can be the tipping point impacting a number of health equity issues, having a domino effect on our health, housing, and ability to meet basic needs for our families. Our data shows for most income levels, the number one source of health insurance is through your employer. So if I'm losing my job, chances are I'm also losing my health insurance. According to the Urban Institute, the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic downturn has caused the greatest health insurance losses in American history, according to the report by Families USA. As many as at least 43,000 Kansas residents have become uninsured due to job losses that occurred between February and May. This data would indicate that more than 1 in 7 Kansas residents do not have health insurance, a 20% increase from 2018. Kansas ranks in the top 20 states with the highest uninsured rates. Of those states, only 8 have expanded Medicaid. I think it's important too to think of where those job losses are. Many of our lower wage occupations have taken the biggest hit in unemployment. A recent Marketplace Edison research poll noted that today, 47% of Americans would struggle to cover a $250 unexpected bill or expense. Yesterday, we saw a national effort to bring awareness and support to the growing number of Americans who are food insecure due to the pandemic. This all leads us to another important health equity priority, housing. As many of you know, Johnson County, our cities, and UCS have partnered in a housing study and task force effort. The study is wrapping up as we speak. The pandemic has shown a light on the vital importance of having a safe place to be when health depends on our ability to stay in place. It has also shown us that many of our heroes and essential workers are in frontline jobs where the wages have made housing security fragile. As this graph shows, in Johnson County, even for those earning just under $75,000, more than 1 in 5 are housing cost burden. Adding any period of unemployment for our lower wage earners creates the very real risk of losing your housing altogether. Being cost burden in my housing also means difficult choices between housing, food, childcare, and other necessities. Individuals and families with limited income must figure out how to meet these essential needs with extremely limited resources. These families often go without certain necessities and may rely on the public and charitable safety net or depend on family and friends to help them get by. Which leads us to our last data point we want to be thoughtful of as we go into this legislative session, our public safety net. And the very real question of how vulnerable is too vulnerable. As we see so many more of our neighbors struggling to recover from the pandemic and grapple with job loss, potential eviction, struggle to meet basic needs, is our safety net of programs ready to meet them where they are at? Or do we wait to help until they have fallen so far behind that the battle to recover becomes too impossible to win? We look at all this data as a way of understanding the interconnectedness of key issues to help us make the best policy decisions. It provides really a jumping off point to ask, what are our opportunities for interventions and improvement? Just like today, it all starts with multiple sectors coming together, maybe even coming to the table with disparate viewpoints, and lived experiences, but yet tasked with providing solutions to big challenges. So how can we be the most effective? One way is to ensure we create a space where productive give and take can happen, which leads us to a conversation on civility. Our moderator for this discussion is UCS board member, Patty Markley. Patty, turn it over to you for further discussion and introductions. Patty, you're still on mute.
Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Okay. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Can people hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear.
All right, thank you, Julie. So sorry for that, you guys. We're excited to have with us today 2 of the founding members of the Civility Caucus in the Kansas legislature. We have Representative Stephen Johnson with us and Senator Tom Hawk. Representative Johnson is a Republican from Asaria, Kansas, and he has represented the 108th District since 2011. This district includes all or parts of Ellsworth, McPherson, Rice, and Saline counties. Representative Johnson has served as the chair of the Committee on Taxation, the vice chair of the Joint Committee on Pensions, Investment and Benefits, and has been a member of the Education and as well as the Appropriations Committees. I also have with us Senator Tom Hawk, who's a Democrat from Manhattan, Kansas. Senator Hawk has represented the 22nd District of the Senate since 2013, and he previously served in the Kansas House from 2005 to 2010. And District 22 includes all or parts of Clay, Riley, and Geary counties. He has served as the ranking minority member on the Ways and Means Committee, and I think several, if not all, of the Ways and Means subcommittees. He served on the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, Utilities Committee, Transportation Committee, and the Joint Committee on State Building and Construction. And I think it probably would have just been easier to list the committees that don't include Senator Hawk on them. Both of you, Senator Hawk and Representative Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this important subject. So let's just jump in. How did this all begin? Was there some specific event or need you recognized that motivated you to want to do this? Senator Hawk, do you want to start?
Yes, and I have to unmute too. So thank you. And before I begin, the UCS Kansas Public Policy platform that you have is quite impressive. So I want to thank the group that's listening for what they're doing. And it does fit with part of my motivation for getting in this. I think a lot of this comes from relationships, and Elaine Bowers, the senator from Concordia, got me involved in this by inviting me to participate in a workshop that the National Institute for Civic Discourse out of the University of Arizona, their Next Generation project, started in Seattle. So I went to that. It turned out their award winner for contributing to civic discourse was Gabby Giffords that year. And that got me very interested in it. And Senator Bowers and I kept trying to get leadership to give the go-ahead to do this on the Senate side. As Representative Johnson will say, moving the Senate's a little more difficult than the House in some ways. And so we wound up talking to Representative Johnson and a few others, and fortunately he got excited about it, and that's really what got us going. I'll let him embellish that a little more.
Sure. Well, the senator started before we did, and it was exciting to learn of their work. And of course, the National Institute for Civil Discourse was in part focused on what happened with Gabby Giffords and saying, we've got to get better at talking to each other before we communicate this way. And for me, I was watching in the fall a couple of years ago when we lost Senator John McCain and former President Bush. And I saw in the wake of their funerals for 2 to 3 days, what appeared to be kind of a coming together to celebrate what we had done, to celebrate that we are one nation, one government, and we share that government, even though we may have great disagreements within it. And I wondered what might it look like if we could make that last, and what might former Senator Dole's legacy be as we celebrate what he has done at some point in the future. So I called a colleague that I came into the House with. As it was mentioned, I'm a Republican. Kathy Wolf Moore is a Democrat, and a great person that I got to come in to the legislature with, and said, what might we do? So we started talking about that. And then the next spring is actually when Senator Hawk got together with a few of us and some of the resources at K-State through that summer. We talked about it in September. We got excited in that there were a bunch of entities like yours already trying to achieve this. So we were able to put some of them together, and then we focused on putting together a program that we'd have the legislature do in January of last session. So that's then when we actually would have started talking in the legislature. Until that point, we were kind of talking around it. But Tom and I also went to the conference in Nashville in August of a year ago August, where we looked at what they were doing and looked into that program. And then in September, a number of organizations, including another one that you're involved with, Patty, and several came together to help us plan and make it happen.
That's great. So Representative Johnson, you mentioned that next generation program with National Institute for Civil Discourse. Can you tell us a bit about that program and then specifically that training day back in January that you mentioned when you kicked off with the Kansas legislature, that civility caucus, and really brought the other members in?
Sure. So under the National Institute for Civil Discourse, there are a number of entities that are now engaged. And one of them is Next Generation, which is a program for state legislatures. And it's run by other state legislators. For example, Senator Bowers, Senator Hawk mentioned, is one of the facilitators for that program. So they travel and lead us in our own discussions to say, what is it? What can we learn about it? And what do we do? So as we set that up, we were really fortunate. Washburn University provided space for us, which was great. The Sunflower Foundation provided funding for us, which was also great. We couldn't have done it without partners like that, as well as content partners. Then the weather gave us a tremendous ice storm, which wasn't so great. But what was telling within that is the number of people that still showed up in an ice storm when everything was closed, as we started calling at 2 in the morning to figure out if we could even have a space or if anybody could physically get there to prepare food. We had a great turnout of about 60 folks that showed up to be a part of that session. So we were excited about that start. And I'll let Tom talk a little more about some of the details inside it.
No, great description. Anytime you try and change culture, it seems like there's always another obstacle, and that ice storm surely was. And I think I was pleasantly surprised that we had such a good attendance on one of the worst days we've had weather-wise. But I think what was really incredible about it was the other legislators that came from other states who traveled during that ice storm and the day before to get there and share some of the process things. I think those of us who plan programs for political leaders sometimes forget that they really like to talk too. And part of that workshop was actually getting us to talk about the things that had motivated us to get into public service and some of the bumps that each of us had faced in our own lives. And I know one particular legislator that sometimes is difficult for me to work with shared some of his family history growing up. And every time I had some difficulty with him, I would reflect back on what he had said during that workshop. And it made me a little warmer in my heart and a little more open to look for ways to work with that particular person that oftentimes my brain goes, wow, he's really difficult. I need to find somebody easier to work with. And then I think about that story of what he was up against as a high school student and his story. And so there were a host of those activities. Stephen I know will share some of the others, but we got a good format to follow up with some of our meetings that we continued on after the session started.
So we had a chance to learn from them as well. And then what we felt was really important, there's a Japanese proverb that beginning is easy and continuing is hard. We didn't want it to be a once and done event. We knew that change would be a long process and to accomplish something would be hard, but the process would be the key. So we would close each of the meetings that we had then and subsequently with action planning to say, okay, what do you want to do? How do we take next steps and how do we take them together? So that sharing piece, the learning piece, and the action planning piece became kind of the frame that we would work through.
Senator Hawk, did you want to mention the icebreaker piece that because of that day that one thing yeah.
Of course, we senators never miss an opportunity to talk some more. And as often my colleagues say, let me be brief, and usually 10 minutes later is the end of the brief part, and then the message starts. No, we decided and Stephen and Kathy set up a planning group. Credit to Stephen for really grabbing this and giving us a structure to keep us on point. But we try to do an activity to start each of the sessions, keeping it short enough that we don't interfere with the program, but do it in small groups. And it ranges from a series of topics. We had one that was a Jimmy Fallon takeoff called Truth or Fib that we learned a lot of things. Actually, we legislators don't mind fibbing a little bit, I found out, but it all comes back to the truth. And so we've done a series of things that ranges from, what was your background growing up? Why did you get into this? What are some of your favorite hobbies? Just getting to know people. And I really believe for democracy to work, we have to find ways to talk with each other. And we're very polarized now, that's no secret. But I think if we have those conversations, we find out that most of us want the same ultimate outcome for people, and that's happiness and success. But we may have different ways of getting there. And if we can get to know one another, and so these icebreakers or sharing sessions, I think have been a valuable thing for us to find out about one another and come to like one another, whether or not we agree on some of the political things we do across the street under the dome.
Exactly. So you mentioned polarization. We've just come through what most would agree is a very divisive election season. And how does that affect the work you are doing and the relationships you've created and nurtured through this group? And how can groups such as yours help bridge that divide that we're feeling and that polarization?
That's a $64,000 question for all of us, isn't it? Well, this is a silver bullet. I'm sure if we just do this, it'll absolutely wipe out polarization and we'll be in great shape. Probably not, but for me, it's one step. And I'll repeat what I said. I think one way to at least mitigate the negative effects of polarization is to get to know other people. And we're so involved in the business when we're in the Capitol working on committees and issues that sometimes we don't really take the time to connect up with people who may differ. And as humans, we all like to navigate to people who think like us and are like us. And this is a chance really to get to know other people. And I think that does break down the polarization. I'll let Stephen tell the rest of the whole story.
Well, I think we know this one. Elections are so difficult. And I want to listen to the messages that we get from the voters. That is important. I was surprised in that I felt that folks have been talking about working together more, and that wasn't necessarily how people voted in the elections as we look at some of the outcomes. So perhaps there is something to listen to and learn from there. But I didn't happen to have a challenged election this year. I now look back and say I'm fortunate to have had one so that I know what happens in other elections and how difficult that can be. And it's very hard to come together after some marginally to completely marginally true to completely untrue things have been shared, particularly through print media, but wherever. And how do you overcome that and say, okay, let's just go back to focusing on good policy. So that is very difficult. And the only way to change that, if indeed we want to change that, is for groups like this to keep talking and make this the majority. So we've got a lot of growing to do. But I think it is important. And prior to the election, or the year prior, I really heard a lot of people. But again, I'm in my own echo chamber, just like many people can be. But I really heard a lot of people saying, why can't we just work for the good of the state, whatever the entity is, and get past the partisan bickering? So that was our goal, is to see, can we just talk to each other more? Can we focus on policy more than the partisan narratives that can grab hold of policy?
So Representative Johnson, I've heard you say that it's important for groups such as this to be a place for hearing rather than to be heard. And I think that's very important differentiation. And can you expand on that and maybe explain how groups like this either succeed or don't succeed because of that?
Right. I think that's a good statement and says it pretty well itself. When I looked at other efforts like this that didn't continue, one of the potential contributing factors was, well, I'm not getting heard on the floor or other places, so I'll bring up my issues to this group, which is a friendly listening group. When that becomes some of our focus, it's hard to continue on that mission. So I really think it is about learning to be better at hearing than focusing on being heard in this environment, in this effort. There is a place to be heard also. But it's not primarily at that time that we seek to come together. So seeking to hear rather than be heard is part of it. And the other part, and Tom mentioned it as well, is appropriately and at the right times being able to hold up a mirror of truth to policy recommendations to say, can you run through that with me again? I'm not sure I quite got how all of those things hung together. Because we have gotten kind of two distinct narratives as we listen to the media, to partisan messages. And when we're dealing with one issue, there can't be two separate solutions, right? If it's going to be a shared one, how do we come together on that? So what I have discovered and learned with many of you, and we've got some great participants across our members participating in the call that are working on this, I don't own the truth myself. It is too big, whatever that issue is. So you pull it out. If it's the budget that I work on a lot, if it's the climate and environment, there are so many variables that I can understand a good portion, but my view will be more complete if I'm fortunate enough to get other views, and actually views that are somewhat different than my own in that effort to seek the truth. So the other piece is seeking the truth together, and the bigger that together is, the better. And recognizing that I don't own the truth. The truth is, but it's not mine. I can't divinely empower that. So those are just some of the thoughts that together we've developed and shared in somewhat, and would continue to through the action planning. So that's some of the give and take. Some of it is a little lighter, just to figure out what do we do next. The lunch lottery idea that Representative Pam Curtis from Wyandotte County had was a great idea, just to mix us up and to have us meet people that we didn't always talk to.
Very, very good. So how do we grow these efforts? How can we as citizens support you all, or how can we get involved ourselves with organizations? What's the best way for us to do that?
You want me to take a quick stab at that, Stephen?
You bet.
I think, and you know, Patty, you've been one of our good partners, and we have different groups who show up for our legislative meetings. A few lobbyists have shown up from some of the corporate and association groups. So having people interested in it, and then I think building on the groups, we have Ed O'Malley's Leadership Center group. Ed was one of our speakers. We had the minister of one of the Kansas City churches speak on one of our Zoom meetings. And I think there's a host of people that we need to reinforce are looking for ways to have less polarization, bringing people together. At K-State, Tim Schaefer, who's the new director for the Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy, and he's also affiliated with the Next Generation Project. And I think he's affiliated with the Kettering Foundation. So those are just some of the national groups that I think give us tools, potentially resources, be it money or materials. And Stephen has talked in our little 4 or 5 person planning group that we'd like to see this notion of civic dialogue, which is a foundation for democracy, and really have that spread out in lots of ways maybe having legislators in their communities develop some skills to be facilitators for the tough issues that we have. But I think there are a host of opportunities that go both directions. And we want our city commissioners, our county commissioners, our civic leaders to have these skills. And as Stephen said, how to be able to listen and how to recognize that the truth is not always viewed the same by every participant in a discussion, but let's have enough civility that we have the skills to talk with one another.
So that is the overview of it. I think, Patty, you had worked to create some details of who some of those entities are so that if folks wanted to engage, they could go to the website or various links that were there. So if that's something that's available, and Tom talked through them, but I am excited about so many efforts that I've seen going on. Extension was one of them that I learned about early on. I went on, I was looking at NICD, I find a video and I see it's somebody from K-State. I'm like, how do I not know about this? And that was Tim Schaefer, and learning about Extension and their role in the past, and the Master Facilitator program that they created, which was at that time 2 Extension agents in Douglas County. Really, I think that's a possible platform to help us learn together. As Tom said, the basics of democracy are on an informed electorate. And it's not a dually informed electorate. It's that, how do we get folks to actually talk together about whatever that issue would be, whether we're in a fight over what color to paint the water tower, or our school bond issue, or whatever can just tear us apart. How could we help people make that decision? And of course, there's a plethora of them in the legislature for us to look at. So those entities are very useful, and a direct application to it. In Extension, the 4-H program has actually started their own effort at holding these dialogues and done a very good job at it, and tackled some questions that I thought might be a little too tough to start with. Right out of the gate, one of them that they took on was, what do we do with guns? And they dove into it and they made it through. They could actually talk about it. So there might be a way that young people can help to teach us on that. They're in the Johnson County area, and Senator Hawk mentioned Pastor Adam Hamilton has been working on that with the church. Great to see that he's on, I think, the call today. So that's fabulous. But the Pound Love Your Neighbor campaign, and having those signs showing up along with the less Love Your Neighbor signs sometimes, and certainly all of the advocacy signs that were there, I think was a wonderful message to start and broaden that idea of, yes, we serve a lot of interests here, but we need to focus on staying together. One of the quotes I really like is from Martin Luther King Jr., which I was thinking of saving towards the end, but he said, either we learn, and I'll mess it up, so those of you who know it can correct my vernacular, but either we learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools. So those efforts have been really exciting to see going on. And I think the faith-based community in parallel with what we're doing would be a big way to reach a lot of people to say, okay, we are seeking the truth, and are we getting truth in all of these messages, and how might we like to move together? If I, Patty, can kind of go there, one of the questions I saw is what we were doing in the session from the chat. And I think it leans into that, in that we hope to have a similar kickoff meeting, but there is a Twitter handle that will be active during the session. It was active during the last session. And Patty, thanks for your help on that. And that's at or pound KS Civility. And a way to follow what we are doing. And would love to have anyone engage with that, share thoughts. In this year's meeting, which we intend to hold on January 15th, I don't yet know if it'll be in the morning or the afternoon. It will depend on the legislative schedule. We plan a similar meeting to last year. And this year we are inviting others who want to participate. We had partner organizations who were focused on the legislators, but the intention would be to have the legislative track. If others wished to participate, looking at a legislative alumni track is one example of another group that might be there. Our partner organizations and perhaps faith-based partners would be interested in participating along that same way. We do our own sharing. We come together for learning. I actually heard back from the folks I was trying to get booked for that, so I'm more excited about that part. And then our action planning would be the way that we would close that to see what we could each do and then bring that back together to see where we can support each other's efforts. So excited about any ways that we can just work towards that piece of how do we focus on policy and how there was a question on advocacy that I saw also. And I think what's effective in the universe of civil discourse is saying the voices that we hear from are there with a specific interest. And being able to come with that specific interest and say, I know there's a lot of other things going on, but here's how it may fit into a bigger picture than my specific interest would be a real change in advocacy as well, versus this is my deal and I need you to get it done, or I'm going to work to get rid of you from whatever, which is, I would say, the majority of advocacy that is there. So perhaps that would work to change it on both ways. The experience for those that don't want to get in the dogfight of do this or else, and see if we could change it that way. So just some ideas off the top of my head. I'm sure I missed some of the questions.
Patty, to lift up just a couple questions that have come in the chat.
Okay.
One is there was a question around leadership involvement at the House and Senate. So are the leadership of the two houses actively engaged in this work? And I'm going to do a twofer for you. And the second question is, what happens when I have an elected official, especially in one case, it's my neighbor, and from this questioner, and my calls go unanswered. There's not a connection point for me as a constituent and a voter to the very person I elected. So those are two questions that we would love to hear a response on.
Could I tackle the second question? This is a simplistic notion. Next Gen talks about when they do their workshops, one of the things they build it around is a meal to start. And in our case, in January, we did a meal to finish. And that is a human thing we sometimes forget about. I sometimes substitute coffee, and I'm a big believer in triangles when you have a difficulty. Sometimes that's called gossiping, but natural human trait. When we have a difficulty, we like to gossip about that with somebody else that we think is an ally. But I think we can also use triangles. And that question I saw, I thought about how I made my own attempt to relate to that particularly legislator, and finally found that we had a common TV program, The Walking Dead, that we would process every Monday to find out what happened Sunday night and whether humanity was going to survive the apocalypse. And that was before the pandemic. So I think finding somebody who has a good relationship with that legislator, that may be a friend, and ask to get together a small group and invite that legislator for a cup of coffee and a conversation where they feel safe with the person that's their friend. We have people that are so issue focused, we sort of know how a conversation might go. And I think there's a natural human avoidance to avoid that. But to make that contact, I think using a triangle, a healthy triangle, could be a way to do that, and make sure, as Steve said, talk about more than just your issue, get to know that person and what they care about. And nearly everybody cares about their children and grandchildren. And that's always a good icebreaker topic before you get into the social issue of the day where you know you're going to differ, or the political issue. Steve, you may want to talk about the other question, because your leadership did show up in January, and some of your leadership showed up staff from my leadership showed up, and we have a new leadership in the Senate. So I'm gonna press a little bit to see if we can get them to participate.
So yes, on our side, our speaker, majority leader, and speaker pro tem did make it to the January meeting. It was off and on through the rest of the session, which was true for everyone, including the planning team. So I don't know if I can cast stones on those subsequent meetings. But there was some engagement. They had agreed to send out the letter for us, which we had appreciated. Senate leadership did not happen to participate. And again, there's a lot of things going on that could have been competing for that. But and certainly on the minority leader side in the House, I know Tom Sawyer was engaged in the effort. I don't know that he was always able to attend, but would not question his commitment to the effort at all. I don't know, I don't remember if Senator Hensley made it to any of the meetings or not. But clearly there was a little more engagement in the House than we had in the Senate. We had pretty good engagement from Senate Democrats, I would say.
I want to add, while I think it's wonderful to have the elected partisan leadership participate and support, but I don't think it's essential. And I think leadership is something we often think only occurs from those who are anointed, when every one of us, I don't care whether you're elected leader in the legislature or whether you're the leader in your family or just a member, you can use your leadership position, and we all have it. And that's just making a choice of what you want to do to make the world a little bit better, and having a plan of how you're going to go about that, so you're not so emotionally reactive that you submarine your efforts before you even start. And so I think having Stephen get the House going and connecting us up with Elaine and myself was a critical ingredient, and we didn't need the full buy-in of leadership. Pleased with what we got, actually, but I don't think that's a critical thing. It's having members who are willing to stick their necks out and make things happen.
And we didn't want to hand the reins over, in that we did not want it to be partisan. And it wasn't necessarily bipartisan. I'd say it was more nonpartisan as a goal, just to say it doesn't matter. So that part was good. I think thanks, Tom, for your ideas on connecting. It is hard. Sometimes during the session, I am sure I am guilty of not getting back to people. Sometimes after a second call, my staff tries to help me be better at that. But I like the idea of connecting, and that was an interesting piece of our event. One we hope to have as part of January was the Bob and Donna story, which were two people connecting over an incredible divide. If you're interested, if you put in Mutual of Omaha, Bob and Donna, that story will probably come up. But Donna was the leader of One Iowa, which is the LGBTQ entity in Iowa. Bob was the leader of the what would be equivalent to the Kansas Policy Institute, a very right family where they're diametrically opposed on that biggest issue. And Donna invited Bob for coffee. And interestingly enough, they actually did become friends. They didn't agree on that issue, still don't. But it was a great story, and we hope to hear more from them in January.
That's great.
Well, thank you so much, Patty. Thank you for moderating the conversation. Representative Johnson, thank you so much for sharing part of your morning with us. Senator Hawk, thank you. Senator Hawk, a special thank you to you. Representative Kathy Wolfmore was to join us this morning. She had a wonderful opportunity to help celebrate her husband and a milestone for him, and conflicted in the end. And Senator Hawk was very gracious in coming to our aid. And so, one, we congratulate Representative Wolfmore's husband, and two, we thank Senator Hawk for your flexibility this morning, and thanks for sharing some of your time with those of us here on this side of the state. So we really appreciate it. And at this point, we are turning it over to Tom Robinette. Tom Robinette is a former UCS board member and current member of our Council of Advisors. And as many of you know, oftentimes the moderator of our legislative panel. And Tom, we'll turn it over to you to introduce this morning's panel and to moderate that portion of our session. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Julie, and I'm glad to be here. It's always nice to for Kathy Wolf Moore to have a chance to celebrate husbands. That's a great opportunity. Let's start off. I'd like to introduce the three panelists we have with us today, the three legislators. I think probably most people know them. I don't think they are strangers, and I don't believe that they'll have any problems with civility, or you'll hear complaints about their response to constituents or other people trying to get a hold of them. But anyway, I'd like to introduce first Senator-elect Cindy Holscher, a Democrat who was recently elected to represent Senate District 8, which covers parts of Overland Park. She previously served in the House for a period for 2 terms, representing District 16. While serving in the House, she was on the K-12 Education, Health and Human Services, Rural Revitalization, and Interstate Cooperation Committees. As with the other 2 panelists, I know we've had elections for leadership, but it'll be just a little while before I think the committee appointments are done. So we'll be talking about the experience that our 3 panelists have. I will mention that Cindy was just elected as co-chair of the Johnson County delegation for this year. Excuse me. Next, we have Representative Stephanie Clayton, a Democrat who is in her 5th term, or will be serving her 5th term, representing District 19, which includes parts of Leawood, Overland Park, and Prairie Village. Representative Clayton was recently elected to be the House Minority Whip. She has in the past served as the ranking minority member of the Education Committee and as a member of the Committee on Taxation, Federal and State Affairs, and the 2019 Special Committee on Federal and State Affairs. And she's currently serving on the 2020 Special Committee on Economic Recovery. Then we have Representative Brandon Woodard, a Democrat, has served District 30 since 2019, which includes parts of Lenexa and Olathe. He'll be entering his 2nd term. In the past, he's served as the ranking minority member on the Higher Education Budget Committee, and also as a member of the Insurance and Federal and State Affairs Committees. I want to thank all 3 of them before we run out of time at the end. I know this is a tough time of the year with the holidays, and as the upcoming session looms, everyone wants some of your time, and we really appreciate your choosing to spend some time with us this morning. I think we'll start off by asking each of the 3 of you to spend 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes. I think somebody defined brief a little while ago, just to kind of share what you see in the upcoming session, some of the important issues you believe that the legislature will be addressing. And let's start with Senator-elect Cindy Holscher. Cindy?
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much for the introduction, Tom. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and UCS for hosting this event. I will tell you, I am reporting live to you from the farm, and we got snow. So while maybe not everybody's excited about it, I am. So I am actually here with my parents. My father is going to have surgery, so helping them out for a little bit. So like I said, here I am on the farm and very excited about snow coming. So I guess we didn't get any at home. So maybe I'll bring it with me. But anyway, as far as looking ahead, as Tom alluded to, yes, I was just elected to the Senate, so I'll be going to the other side of the building this year after having served 4 years in the House representing District 16. And as was mentioned earlier by Representative Johnson or Senator Hawk. The election results, we took a hard right turn this year. So there are essentially fewer of us in the middle where a lot of the work seems to be done. But we're going to navigate through it and work to see, what are the issues we can focus on coming up. And, there are a number of us very, very interested, obviously, in bringing forward good legislation to help people. So that focus will stay there. Of course, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talk about COVID, navigating through the rest of this pandemic. And there are some very different perspectives on this, some very ideology driven. So that will likely be a challenge as we try to move through the rest of the pandemic. But of course, the good news is there's light coming at the end of the tunnel, closer to vaccines. And I'm seeing some of my friends who are on the front lines getting vaccinated now. So that's exciting. So we're getting closer and closer. Revenue issues will come right along with that because of COVID. We're in pretty decent shape when the pandemic hit. Of course, that has brought new challenges. So I anticipate, school funding is always the first area that gets hit when there's a revenue issue, or the first area that seems to be looked at. As a public school advocate, of course, I'm going to work hard to make sure that whether it's remote or in person, that we are funding our schools. And I'm glad there's the choice. And I will tell you, I have 3 kids doing remote. It's working for us. I know different people have different comfort levels. And like I said, I'm glad the choices are there. So again, my belief is we've got to ensure we have good funding for our schools, not just throughout this period, but ongoing, because we had just reached kind of what we call the bare minimum of getting constitutionally funded schools. So, and along with that, we're projected to lose more teachers this coming year. So that will be a challenge we have to look at to ensure that we're bringing in great instructors. So that'll be part of the focus there. I do wonder too, since we have now a lot of Governor Brownback's peers still in office, and then a number who came back, will we be looking at potential restarts or attempted restarts of parts of the experiment? So that will be very interesting to see how that plays out. Like I said, due to kind of some of the numbers that we see in the legislature, both the Senate and the House. I will tell you, going forward, my focus is going to continue to be on looking for new streams of revenue. You all likely know we are surrounded by states that have expanded Medicaid, that have instituted medicinal cannabis programs. So those are some areas that hopefully we will look at. We were actually gearing up for some hearings on some of those topics when session ended last year. So hopefully some of those get picked back up again, as far as, like I said, some of those revenue streams that are very much available to us, that people are very receptive to. So like I said, that's, to me, those are some of the things we're going to be seeing. Of course, I'm going to keep advocating for Medicaid expansion, funding our schools. And then I work a lot on victims issues as far as sexual exploitation, those types of things. So I'll keep working on those areas, but we'll just keep chipping away where we can.
Thanks, Cindy. I appreciate those comments. Representative Clayton, how about you? What do you see coming up?
Well, good morning, everyone. And first, I would like to say thank you for Senator Hawk and Chairman Johnson for speaking earlier. I think that their work that they have done on civility has been especially helpful. I see that, or at least earlier, I saw that my small group Civility Caucus buddy, Megan Lynn, is on here. So hi, Megan, just wanted to say hello and good morning. I think Senator-elect Holscher, it's so hard to say goodbye to you, Cindy. It's going to be a shame to see you go to the other side of the building, but I know that you'll do wonderful work there. But she has touched on a lot of the main issues that sort of lay out the general groundwork for what we will be facing. Just a moment, please. Hey. Okay, sorry. In any case, so as a member of the tax committee, I think that we will again see a lot of the pushes for some of the more revenue destabilizing influences that were pushed prior to COVID are now sort of being, the message has been pivoted a little bit. These are including like items like allowing large multinational companies to have tax breaks. And I know that during the process of committee, I asked, well, if this is going to benefit Kansans, I'm sure you can tell us how many jobs this will create. That question has not yet been answered. And so I think as we go in, I spent about the first half of our segment talking about how, with some of my constituents who are calling in regards to unemployment backlog. So we are still dealing with that. I've always been more of a Keynesian when it comes to economic policy. And what we're hearing a lot more about is not so much how economic decline puts us all into a certain perspective, but on how economic recovery is not the great equalizer. So in the economic decline, especially over, our sort of stay-at-home time, especially during April and May, we really were all in this together. Everyone lost everything all at once, right? But as we begin this recovery, we sort of see what we refer to as a K-shaped recovery. So some of us are doing okay, Dow's looking great, but not everyone is. And so as we move forward in policy, I think you are going to see a lot of people pushing forward with this in mind. So you can look to see, for instance, we talk a lot about the sales tax on food. Well, remember, for every cent we reduce that, we have to find $60 million. So that's quite a huge step down in sort of a budgetary balance that is difficult to maintain even in the best of economic times. So you might see more of a push for a food sales tax rebate. And so you'll probably see that in tax committee. You'll see some property tax relief. You'll see opportunities for people to perhaps itemize on their tax. I mean, I could get really down into the weeds here, but tax is my love. So that's, I know it's a weird thing to say, but we talk a lot about how our budgetary policy, our budget is the bill that most reflects our values. But our tax bill, our tax policy also reflects our values because we determine who pays for government. Where does that revenue come from? And so we really look at that, and that is a huge reflection of our morality. I think that our current tax plan is a pretty solid reflection of a good morality, but we have a lot that can be changed. So I will definitely talk more about economic recovery, of course, but I will yield the rest of my time to my esteemed colleague, Representative Woodard.
Thank you very much. And Representative Woodard, what are you going to be working on in the upcoming session?
Yeah,
and you get your time plus Stephanie's.
Well, in the House, we have to stay brief. We have to address our colleagues from the well. And if you go on too long, they get bored and start talking over you. So I will try to stick to being brief. But in addition to what I'll be working on, I do think there are just a couple of the themes that we're going to see come through. As has been mentioned, the House and Senate did take a turn to the right. And so both chambers did become more conservative. So I do think that there's a number of issues that you're going to see go through rather quickly. I do think the constitutional amendment on abortions coming back. Be on the lookout for judicial selection. But we want to focus on what can we do and what can we do that's going to be good for Johnson County. I think one of the big things I have really, what brought me to public service was my background in higher education, living through the cuts to higher ed as a student. The year that I was student body vice president at KU was also one of the biggest cuts to higher education, and we saw tuition go up by over 8%. Looking at making targeted investments to really grow our workforce is going to be essential to rebuilding the Kansas economy after COVID. Even before the pandemic, Kansas was only going to graduate about, I think it was about 45,000 students from our entire higher education system. So our four-year universities, community colleges, career and technical education programs. That didn't even address the 53,000 open jobs we had in Kansas. We quite literally cannot graduate enough people to fill the jobs that we have here. So what are we doing to train a workforce that continues to bring employers here, but also how do we bring that workforce here to Kansas? And so looking at things that we can do to address student debt, to work with our chambers of commerce to encourage businesses to make sure that in part of their benefit packages, they're offering either tuition assistance or student debt relief to help their employees pay off the tens of thousands of dollars of student debt. And so those are a couple of the things that I want to do. We have to make sure to protect our public school funding, but also making those targeted investments in higher education and looking at incentivizing some of the skills and training that people need for some of the jobs that we really need to expand here in Kansas. And as has been mentioned, pandemic aside, the revenue streams are getting smaller and the expenses of running the state continue to be there. And so looking at other ways to generate revenue, I think that one of the things that came up in the last session we got close to doing was sports wagering. Legalizing that, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it is something of capturing activity that's already happening here in Kansas illegally, regulating it and generating some revenue for our state. Looking at things like collecting online sales taxes. You go to a mom and pop shop here in District 30, you're going to pay sales tax. If you're buying online, it's not always the case. And so putting our local businesses on the same playing field as our online retailers is a really good step and also helps generate revenue. If we look ahead at a more comprehensive tax structure, I don't think that there's an appetite with this legislature for major changes in income taxes. But for single filers here in Kansas, we have poverty, poor, and everyone else. For a single filer, our highest tax bracket begins at $30,000. That's not super equitable. And Kansas used to have one of the more progressive tax structures in the country, and now it's one of the most regressive. And so looking at how we can make sure that any changes to our tax policy benefit Kansans, and then corporations, I think is the way to go. So I look forward to the questions. I will go ahead and I'm just hitting 4 minutes now. So I hit under 5, which I was happy about. So I look forward to the questions and the conversation.
Thank you all. I'm sure that your comments are going to prompt some questions, and I would remind everybody to use the chat and pose some questions. I think Christy and Julie are monitoring that probably more closely and better than I. Those of you who know me know how tech savvy I am. And so we've turned it over to someone who knows what they're doing. But we'll start off. We've got some question for each of you that I think probably will get us going, and we'll address some of the things that I know everybody on here is going to be interested in. Let's start with Representative Clayton. Do you want to share a little bit of the work that the 2020 Special Committee on Economic Recovery is doing, and what do you anticipate coming from them?
Thank you. Well, I am holding our very extensive committee recommendations in my hand, and I can tell you that our committee has had a large number of meetings beginning in August and going through this fall, where we have heard from a variety of different economic sectors. And so I really think of Kansas as having 3, maybe 4 economic sectors. So we have oil and gas, agriculture, aviation/manufacturing, and then the service-based economy here in Johnson County. And of course, that has the division of professional services and other types of services. So I don't think that we have necessarily seen a lot of suffering on the part of ag. Perhaps Representative Johnson might want to speak more to that, of course, if he was still on here. But for the most part, our ag sector seems to be doing well, right? Because COVID just isn't really hitting that as much. Oil and gas obviously is having some problems because we are changing the way that we live. Same thing with aviation. So one of the things that we heard a great deal about in the Economic Recovery Committee was what we needed to do to help the aviation industry. Now, it's worth noting that this industry was suffering prior to COVID. So a lot of times we have to look at, is this a COVID issue, or is this an issue that's exacerbated or changed because of COVID? So one of the suggestions of the Economic Recovery Committee was to look at some more economic development incentives, but bear in mind too that the moving of Boeing to South Carolina, that was a pre-COVID situation. And I think that if we offer, I am, usually a big fan of economic development incentives because I listened to Tom Robinette when I first got elected. Tom used to be the lobbyist, the governmental affairs person person for the Overland Park Chamber and offered me a lot of guidance in my early years. So, but as we look at that, we have to think, okay, we have to be smart about the incentives that we provide. So looking at that, thinking, all right, you know, how much travel is going to happen via airline, right? And so looking at that and understanding that we still have to make sure that we're balancing those budgets. We heard a lot from service-based, particularly entertainment and hospitality. So this would be restaurants. You can expect to see a lot of discussions surrounding changes in liquor laws. So we did have some executive orders that did allow for cocktails to go, or curbside cocktails. And this extra revenue is very helpful to a lot of our local governments as well, because, you know, alcohol is sort of taxed 4 times. When we were talking about earlier, looking at creative ways to sort of look at new revenue streams, there are some alcohol-related revenue streams that haven't been touched since I was born. It's been a minute, so, you know, it might be worth looking into. Also, Senator-elect Holscher, I'm going to get used to it, Cindy, I promise, mentioned the fact that we did look at medicinal cannabis. And so we looked at that in the Special Committee on Federal and State Affairs. And so I can definitely see that there is an appetite for that. Maybe not so much recreational, which more's the pity, because I do think that that is a revenue generator. Although obviously we will need to hear from law enforcement sectors and other groups on recreational cannabis. But I'm looking at ways that we can generate revenue to give us that extra padding. I did see a question in the chat, and this is linked to economic recovery. We did discuss this in the Economic Recovery Committee, and that is assisting a very important business sector, and that is especially home childcare. Because this is, you know, we hear a lot about how this economic downturn because of COVID has hit parents, in particular primary parents, because I don't want to make this a gendered conversation. This is usually about the primary parent who has the most responsibility for childcare in the home. Oftentimes, ways that parents can sort of augment their home income is by having home daycares and home childcare. And so looking at that sector, these are not only primary parents, but these are business owners. And so how do we help them? How do we enable them, especially when we sort of have this in remote, out of remote sort of situation that a lot of us can't change? So you're going to see a lot of that in committee recommendations. One more thing I want to touch on is something that was emphasized by a group that used to be known as the Women's Foundation, but is now called United We. And one of the things that they touched on was making licensing easier, because especially during COVID, it is difficult to get out and take those classes to study for tests. It is cost prohibitive to pay for those licenses, to pay for the classes. And so while we want to keep consumers safe, I think removing some of those barriers to licensure not only helps a lot of would-be entrepreneurs, but in particular helps a lot of women and primary parents. So again, I could and will go on, but I want to make sure that the other members of the panel do have time to speak as well. So I'm happy to stand for questions. And again, thank you everyone for having me today.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm amazed we finally found the one person that listened to some of the things that I said. Makes me feel better. Senator-elect Holscher, I know you spent a lot of time as a House member working on Medicaid expansion. What do you think the likelihood of expansion is in this session, or at least in the foreseeable future? And what are other things the state or local governments could do to address people's health care if we don't get to Medicaid expansion?
Yeah, well, obviously it feels like it became a little bit tougher with the 2020 election. We had made some pretty good progress, and as far as, you know, either getting something passed in one side of the house, but then waiting on the other. And obviously we have a governor who is very willing to sign a bill should we send it over. So while, like I said, it feels like it has become harder now, we will still keep working on it. I think we still, as advocates, as community leaders, people who are here today watching and joining in, we have to keep beating that drum because it's important and it's available to us. So we should continue to pursue it. So, you know, and I do think too, this was mentioned a little while ago. I actually feel like we have a greater potential at this point to pass medicinal cannabis, something else that could help aid people as far as access to alternative methods. So I think I mentioned this before, we were actually getting ready to have a hearing on it when session ended last time. So, you know, we'll keep moving forward with that. There are other areas that we'll keep looking at, but I do think you'll see a push in that regard where, you know, just because somebody is opposed to Medicaid expansion doesn't necessarily mean they're opposed to medicinal cannabis. So there's some different dynamics at work there as far as garnering support on that. So I kind of think we'll see some efforts in that area.
Okay, great. We'll move final opening question anyway to Representative Woodard. Any ideas on how the state legislature can ensure that Kansas is maximizing our resources to address pandemic recovery needs?
Yeah, so
Just a simple little question.
yeah, right. I think one of the prouder moments I had in the legislature in my first term was that at the beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of a very polarized legislative session, we all came together to do what was best for Kansans. We looked at extending unemployment benefits and bringing back, you know, the extended unemployment insurance. We came together to extend the governor's disaster declaration. The House almost unanimously did that. Got tripped up on the other side of the building, but you know, eventually we had a resolution that got us to a point where there was compromise and we were able to continue to get the federal benefits. So when we get back to Topeka, we are going to have to extend the governor's disaster declaration once again. Also looking at how we can begin to recover after the pandemic and during it. I'm gonna again hit on the fact that we need to expand Medicaid. We hear in the state house all the time about 50-50 matches, that if we put in a few dollars, the federal government will match what we're doing. Medicaid expansion is one of the best matches out there. The state has to put in $1 and the federal government reimburses us for $9. Bringing back our tax dollars here to Kansas that we're sending to Washington, D.C., we don't get any sort of discount on the fact that we didn't expand Medicaid. We're still sending it to D.C. And sending it to states like Indiana, where then Governor Mike Pence signed Medicaid expansion into law. It's good for recovery because a healthy Kansan workforce is going to be what it takes to rebuild. I also think we're going to have to look at continuing to extend unemployment benefits at the state level. Also, you know, it's currently looking like unless we make changes, that fund could run out in the summer. And so making sure that the state unemployment fund has the resources to continue paying people while we're recovering is going to be really important. And then doing whatever we can at the state level to make sure that our teams, KDHE and everyone else has the resources that they need to get the vaccines distributed to anyone that wants it, to make sure that we can, you know, get to that immunity level where we can get back to whatever the next normal looks like.
Okay, great. I noticed one question on here that I think probably all three of you would have some ideas on, and it's going to be something that I think is important, and that's how can we support, or how can the legislature support working families as schools continue their virtual and hybrid learning programs? And that would be for any of the three of you to weigh in on. Stephanie, Representative Clayton had her hand up, so she can go first.
I'll jump right in on that. We need increased, or at least staying at the current line of school funding, right? Because in order to, you know, as we have the vaccine go out in varying phases, right, we are not going to see the vaccine going to, you know, people my age who are healthy and our children until around summertime. And I still think that we'll see some changes. I think that there are some things in education that are really not going to go much differently. So we need smaller class sizes. is we need buildings that have up-to-date ventilation systems, because now we know that, this is probably a good idea anyway. We'll probably keep the spread of other airborne diseases down, and I'm sure the teachers will thank us for that. They can, I guess the only company that wouldn't like it is like Zicam, right? Because people won't be buying that as much to, but seriously, and I will put in a plug here that I sure do hope that anyone who's a resident of the Shawnee Mission attendance area will be voting in favor of the bond issue. That's a mail ballot that'll come out in January. So shameless plug, I've got 2 kids in Shawnee Mission schools. And so I definitely hope to see that kind of support. So I think that the more that we fund our public schools, the more that it will help our working families, because I don't think that education is childcare, but I do think that our children are safe in our school buildings. I think that we can figure out a way to thread that needle, and one of the best ways to do it is by investing in our schools.
Okay, Representative Woodard, before I cut you off, it looked like you had something that you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think we have realized with this pandemic, something we should have known long before, is that our schools are so much more than a place that our K-12 students are educated. I grew up and was on the free and reduced lunch program, and know how important being in the building is to our students. And so just wanted to echo everything that Representative Clayton said, and the importance of just making sure that folks have the support that they need to be in the classroom when they can. I know right now things are pretty bad, but also making sure that if we are having schools go remote, that we're still providing the services that so many of those families rely on.
Right. Senator-elect Holscher, anything to add?
All I'll say is that if you didn't previously know about issues with school funding, childcare, and how we were lacking in those areas due to the pandemic, you probably do now. So I sincerely hope as leaders we can take the opportunity to build our society and build it up going forward, to strengthen our schools, to strengthen resources for working parents, to provide some of those things that are very necessary to allow the society to function. So that's where my optimism comes in the respect that, okay, there's a challenge here, but what can we do to really address these issues and put us on better footing, and set us up for the future?
Okay, thanks. Here's one that we can throw out to any of the 3 or all 3 of you. What are your thoughts on whether the legislature or possibly the governor might tackle utility or eviction moratoriums again this spring, in view of the COVID-related housing challenges?
I'll jump in. I represent a majority renter district, and am hearing frequently from people who are very, very anxious about what could happen. And so, of course, when it comes to utilities, I've been excited to see Evergy, which is our local provider here, come out saying that pandemic-related shutoffs won't be a thing, but also making sure that we're protecting folks and they're not being evicted or foreclosed on because of pandemic-related expenses. So I think that the legislature, the majority of the folks, understand why it's important to extend those moratoriums. And of course, I believe that's something the governor would be on board with as well.
Do you think that there's the sentiment throughout the legislature to do that? Sentiment, votes, maybe?
I think all 3 of us on here will be working with our colleagues to express what we're hearing back home to see if we can get them on board.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Ditto.
All right, I see a question here that we anticipate more families are going to be touching the safety net. Many of these families and individuals have never had an interaction with social services, and some have fragile situations that even worsened as a result of COVID. What are interventions that can be deployed to help them? Some of the services available, some of the things that you might know and can recommend.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Tom. Sadly, we don't have a lot of safety nets. A lot of our agencies during the Brownback years were really underfunded. So the past few years, a lot of work has been done to help rebuild those organizations. And, we've probably all heard a lot about DCF and some of the issues that were happening there. So it's been a little bit like what I've said this before, it's been a little bit like whack-a-mole. You kind of work to get one area under control. Then you work over in another area to get that under control, and then try to build up from that. So again, we were just feeling like we were kind of in the phase of getting some things under control when COVID hit. So that will be the challenge to us as far as, moving forward to continue to rebuild those organizations. The great thing, though, I will tell you, is that Governor Kelly has appointed some terrific people in charge of these various departments. People that are very passionate about the work, very experienced, idea people too. So like I said, that to me is one of the best things about moving forward currently, even in this environment, is that we have some really sharp people in place to really help us address those situations.
Okay, well, I think we're about at the end of our time. We've got some closing remarks. I want to thank all three of you again for sharing your ideas and sharing your time with us this morning. And glad to see everyone. Stay safe and well, and have a great holiday. And I will turn this back over to Julie.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm going to invite everybody as Todd Jordan, who is the United Way of Greater Kansas City's Chief Community Engagement Officer. And Todd, we thank United Way. We're a planning partner. We're proud to be a planning partner with United Way. And this is one of the events that we do in that planning partnership. So as Todd is closing us out, I invite everybody to actually turn on your cameras. Let us see each other in this virtual room together. And Todd, please share some closing remarks. Thank you so much to all our panelists and to our wonderful moderator, Tom Robinette. And Todd, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Julie. Have I appeared on the screen? Is everybody hearing me?
Yep.
All right, good deal. We've navigated the Zoom. We're going to get through 2020 together. I would like to thank all our elected officials who joined us today as part of the program and virtually. I know it's tempting to already be on vacation and start the holiday season early, especially after the year we've all had, but we appreciate your time and effort in being a part of the discussion today. I'd also like to give Julie Brewer, the staff and board of UCS, a massive thank you for once again putting together a wonderful event. United Way of Greater Kansas City is proud to have an excellent planning partner in UCS, and the Kansas Public Policy Forum is just one example of that partnership in action. Today, we had an expansive discussion, one that reflects on our past as a state and what we will need to do together as we move forward into 2021 and beyond. I deeply appreciate the work of Representative Johnson, Senator Hawk, and Representative Wolfmore in absentia, and all the members of the Civility Caucus, because this is critical work that falls on all of us. We need elected officials to lead by example, to know when to stop running for office and start governing, and how to be civil with each other if we expect that among our residents. But this expectation of civility also falls upon everybody within the state of Kansas to elevate their dialogue, their logic, and their discipline of thought. Above all, Senator Hawk and Representative Johnson's point regarding getting to know people is essential. I could go off on a lecture about the neuroscience of empathy if you all want, but the short version is the more you get to know people, the more you see yourself in them, you build empathy, which builds relationships and ultimately builds community. And we cannot fail in this endeavor. Even without COVID, we have challenges in housing, childcare, transportation, food insecurity, financial stability, and affordable healthcare all across the state. The U.S. is the single largest, most complicated social, economic, and political community in the existence of human history, and we're not going to make it, let alone move forward, unless we can shut out the extremes, those who spread falsehoods, or those who view people that disagree with them as absolute evil. We're not that far apart on all those things that we want for people in this state, and even if we differ in the means to that end, that does not give us license for malicious rhetoric and hate. We need to focus on civil discourse, the building of empathy and community, because it's the bedrock of our state and nation, as well as historically the starting point for any progress. My second and kind of final point as we come to a close is in regards to the policy discussion and the needs we are seeing across the state. We touched briefly on the rent and mortgage crisis that we've been facing, which United Way has been neck deep along with UCS in working on all across the metro area. And one of the biggest benefits of working with United Way is the power of the network. I serve on the United Way State Association for both Kansas and Missouri, which means I get to connect with every type of organization in all kinds of places. One-person shop, multi-million-dollar agencies, rural, suburban, small town, and urban. And while there are nuances in every community, the core issues remain the same everywhere I go and whoever I talk to. Affordable housing, quality affordable childcare, transportation, food insecurity, financial stability, and access to healthcare. These are the foundation of a good life. They were needs that existed before COVID. They have been exacerbated by COVID, and they will remain even as we recover from the pandemic. Big or small, rural or urban, those among us who are left behind are counting on us the most, and we have to deliver. They are the priority. They are the ones who need empowerment, and they must be the focus of policymaking. The solutions to these problems, in some instances, have been generations, these problems that have been generations in the making won't come without compromise, respect, or willingness to change your mind on an issue with the same passion and the same effort that you would seek to change the minds of others. It's also going to take revenue, which has been a long-standing challenge for us in Kansas. And while the promise of the vaccine is the best news we've had for most of this year for a lot of us, it does not change the fundamental issues we struggle with in Kansas. While we can do a lot as a United Way, along with great partners like UCS and hundreds of nonprofits across the city, with support of amazing corporate partners and foundations, we know that if we want major transformation that will move the needle on issues like poverty, education, and healthcare, we need effective policymaking right along with us. It takes public, private, and nonprofit sectors working together, as we were able to do with the COVID Regional Relief Fund and with CARES Act funding that has been driving housing stabilization work in our community. And it's that collaboration that's what's going to get us through this crisis and what's going to allow us to build a better future as we look to renew. Again, I thank our elected officials who are with us today and for doing what you are to push forward an inclusive and equitable Kansas for all. Thank you to UCS for being such a wonderful and collaborative organization and for putting together this event, and for all the participants on this call for your passion for our community. Because forums like this are the best way to continue to shape the future of our community, our state, our country, and the world. Thank you all for your time today, and safely enjoy the holidays.
Thank you so much, Todd, and I really appreciate your closing thoughts and words. A lot of powerful messages to leave us with today as we plan for next year. As I said at the beginning, we're this marathon. We still have many miles to go. We can only make it across the finish line if we're willing to come to a table, work together, and recognize, for us in Kansas, our most vital resource is our people. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you next year.